Heard a lot about you, sir. Your appearance is exactly the way I imagined.
Hasbro's retro collection announcements, they're like reaction figures. They're kind of hinting at the Kenner vibe, but they're not quite there. And their recent announcement of the retro vintage Kenner Indiana Jones does not look like the Kenner Indiana Jones. There's something wrong going on with that head. His head looks squished and tiny and not perfectly replicated. Where do I begin? Well, let's take the Wayback Machine to 2022, when Stan Solo released his vintage Kenner Marion Ravenwood action figure. At the time he did that, he had made overtures implying that he was going to move on and do Indiana Jones as well, the original Kenner figure, and recreate that one. Now, why those two figures? Well, those two figures are the entire reason that the Kenner Adventures of Indiana Jones figure range, small as it is so highly collectible, desired, and expensive. Those two figures were the hard ones to find in the 80s, and that caused kids to lose desire to try and collect it. Flash forward now, and those two figures are the most expensive in the range, loose or carded. Loose, mint condition, they go for hundreds of dollars each. Carded, thousands. Marion Ravenwood being, no joke intended, the holy grail of the whole line, with Indiana Jones not terribly far behind.
$3,000.
Those two figures, the two main heroes of Raiders of the Lost Ark, are what most people are seeking to complete their collections. Everything else, as far as the figures go, can be had relatively quickly with a little patience and a little money.
I need $2,000.
However, despite what a lot of Stan Solo detractors like to say, that he's a repro man and he's trying to undercut Hasbro, Stan Solo stays well out of the way of Hasbro's ambitions. And this Indiana Jones situation is proof positive of that.
It depends on how reasonable we're all willing to be. All I want is the girl.
When they announced that retro collection, unexpectedly I might add, because we knew they were going to do 6-inch, because that's what Hasbro does. That's part of their playbook. But I admit that I thought because they already had the molds from the 2008 Indiana Jones figure collection, and they were still doing the Star Wars Vintage Collection super articulated figures in 3 3/4 inch scale, that it would make more sense to just relaunch that line and start adding in new characters that hadn't been made before. Instead, Hasbro decided, no, we don't care about modern style 3 3/4 inch for Indiana Jones anymore, but we want to recreate the entire vintage Kenner collection from scratch. Wow, talk about having to do more work in an area where you're already proven your talents do not lie. So at that point, when the Hasbro Indiana Jones Retro Collection was announced, Stan Solo knew his Indiana Jones ideas needed to be taken off the table, and that's exactly what happened. But what we didn't know in the background was that Stan Solo was very far along in the development of the recreation of the Kenner Vintage Indiana Jones figure. And once again, referencing my comments from the video I made about the Stan Solo Marion, I had no interest in this retro collection line because it looked like crap from the images. Little did I know that it would be even worse in person, but because I owned the entire Kenner run, I had no need or desire to go collect these inferior and overpriced figures. So there I am at Target making my run, looking for some Lego sets, looking for some movies, and I see these things hanging on pegs. I never saw the Indiana Jones in person, but I saw some of the others like Marion, Belloc, and Tote. Every single Marion I saw, every single one, it looks like her head is separating away from the torso, until you find out, no, that's just how the neck joint is molded. But again, I hadn't planned to buy any of these. And then I got home one afternoon, and Stan Solo had sent me a message saying, "Do you have the Retro Collection Indy?" And I said, "No, I have no intention of buying that piece of garbage." And Stan Solo said, "You might want to do so." And I thought, why? He said, because one of the prototypes, one of the later iteration prototypes, is on its way to you, and I want you to look it over. And I said, "Your prototype for the Stan Solo Indiana Jones?" And he said, "Yes." So I started making some emails and phone calls to friends because there were no retro indies being sold in my area. They had all been picked over. And Lio Convoy, thankfully, was able to track one down. He found it and sent it my way. So huge thanks to Lio Convoy for being able to send me this. Before we get into the details on the Stan Solo unreleased Indiana Jones, we need to talk about this Hasbro Retro Collection Indiana Jones, because it is trash. It is a clown show. Let's ride right past the fact that these figures are still on those flimsy, warping card backs. So even though these are retro vintage style figures to appeal to adults of a certain age to display in their collections, Hasbro has cheaped out on the packaging and put them on card backs that couldn't be displayed in a trash can, let alone in a nice studio. Upon removing the figure from the package, I noticed that his face is totally different from the original render from Hasbro. His face looks childish. It looks absolutely bizarre. It looks like a little kid wearing his dad's clothes. And when compared to the original vintage figure, he has no definition in his profile, he has virtually no nose, and his eyebrows are painted on backwards as well. The quality of the figure is so bad he feels like rubber in your hands. He feels like Stretch Armstrong. His limbs are made from this very, very rubbery plastic, similar to the Empire Strikes Back Retro Collection. But here, it's even worse. I could already tell right out of the bubble that the hips on this Indiana Jones were going to tear off without moving. They had gotten jammed up inside the plastic torso. I had to subject this figure to almost 30 minutes of boiling water to loosen up those hips without them snapping off. Hasbro didn't even try to get the colors right. The jacket is way too dark. The pants are way too yellow. It really feels like Hasbro just comped up something, sent it to the factory sent back their first attempt, and Hasbro rubber stamped it and said, good to go. They didn't even try to alter the colors, they didn't try to alter the face sculpt, they didn't try to get more definition in the body or the face, they just said, yep, good enough, and ran with it, and that's what ended up in this package. One of the most notorious failings of the original Indy figure were that his hands were made from plastic that was too brittle, and so when you tried to put the whip or pistol in his hands, the thumbs would often snap off. So Hasbro decided, well, we're gonna make his arms out of more rubbery plastic. Okay, makes sense for the arms. It was a terrible decision for the legs, as I just described, but then they did something even more baffling. They've now addressed the thumb breaking problem, but then they turned around with the accessories and made the handles for them twice as thick. The revolver handle is so thick the Hasbro figure can barely hold it with his hand completely splayed, and then that gun is sitting there on a wing and a prayer. Meanwhile, I don't know if they were asleep at the wheel or if they were 3 sheets to the wind at Hasbro, but they turned around and gave the whip accessory a traffic cone for a handle, and this makes no sense whatsoever. And I keep asking myself, why did Hasbro change the dimensions of these accessories to the extreme, especially when it goes directly against the goal of keeping the thumbs from breaking? They've already addressed that issue by making the hands out of a different, more pliable plastic, and now they're going to double, and in the case of the whip, triple the sizes of the handles for the accessories. Why? I can only think of 2 possible reasons. 1, they're trying to assuage the anti-repro part of our community, which, if you're trying to placate them, Hasbro, I got some advice for you. Don't do retro anymore. That's the only way you're going to actually please these people. Just don't do retro collection stuff anymore. Or, there's the second possibility. They just suck at doing retro.
Now you're getting nasty.
You know it's true.
They clearly aren't good at this. The details are soft, the accessories are chunky and can't be held, the material is rubbery, this whole thing is a mess. You might as well just go do what you're good at, which is hyper-articulated 3 3/4 inch and 6 inch. Just focus on that, because that's where you bat maybe 70%. Where here, you're batting 10, maybe 12%. I mean, you've got simple details here that Hasbro completely whiffed on. Let's take the whip, for example. It has that traffic cone handle, which, what were they thinking there? That looks completely stupid. What generic part is that they just bought in mass and didn't have to tool up themselves? And then to add insult to injury, the whip accessory is barely 2/3 the length of the original. So now you have Indy carrying around this chunky-handled sex whip. If this isn't a slap in the face to collectors, I don't know what is. While we're at it, we might as well also talk about the Hasbro Retro Collection Marion Ravenwood, because she is peg-warming right now, and Stan Solo did make a version of her as well, and I figured, well, we have her in hand, she's available, why not? So I picked her up for this video. She is just as disappointing as I thought she would be when I reviewed the Hasbro Indiana Jones Pulse stream. Her dress does not match the Kenner pattern, no matter how much the Hasbro team protests and talks about all of their forensic research to recreate it and how proud they are of it. They should be embarrassed. They didn't even add the flower detail on the back, which Stan Solo managed to do, as well as replicating the exact lace pattern. And this Retro Collection Marion Ravenwood has holes in her feet that are so small, even the smallest figure stands are too big for this figure. This entire exercise with this Retro Indiana Jones collection is a simulation all the way down to the footholes. So what did we miss out on here? What did we lose when Stan Solo had to pull back on his plans for a vintage Indiana Jones because Hasbro launched their Retro collection instead? Well, something pretty special, and what you're about to see is a late-stage prototype, but it is not the final. There were still tweaks that were going to be made to this because Stan Solo is that meticulous. He has that much of an eye for vintage Kenner designs. And it is a real shame because I know he was working on the skin color. He was going to get that closer to the original vintage. He had some other tweaks he was going to make. But what you're looking at here is the closest thing to final. It is not final. There were still changes that were going to be made. I don't know how many iterations of changes, but it was closer to the finish line than farther away. Let me just put it that way. First of all, we already have excellent color matching here. Amazing color matching. And by design or by accident, the pants are slightly more accurate to Raiders than the original vintage Kenner figure. The head and face sculpt are slightly different to the vintage Kenner, but not by much. And again, more changes were to be made to this figure before it was going to launch. But at least this figure looks like an adult male human being. Stan Solo also made sure to redesign the material of the hands to make sure the thumbs don't break off, but at the same time he kept the accessories to their vintage dimensions. That means that unlike the Retro Collection Indiana Jones, this figure's revolver can actually fit in his holster because it's the proper size. And in what would have been an added bonus, the Stan Solo figure did not have any annoying copyright writing on the back of his jacket whatsoever. The Kenner version has a little bit of copyright stamping, but Hasbro decided to chisel the entire Dead Sea Scrolls on Indy's back. I think the funniest part of all this, and by funny I mean laughing trying not to cry, is that the biggest criticism levied against Stan Solo over the years has been the price per unit of his figures. People are like, that figure's too expensive. I'm not going to pay $40 for a figure. The figures these are based on, Indy and Marion from the Kenner line, they go for hundreds of dollars mint loose, thousands of dollars carded. The reason people want them so badly, including those people that are complaining about Stan Solo's prices, is because they are often the last ones people need to complete their Indiana Jones collections. So you'd rather pay $14.99 for a piece of trash that doesn't look anything like the Kenner original and can barely function as a toy anyway. The rubbery limbs make him impossible to stand up. Marion has no figure stand that can fit her, so she's barely standing up on the edge of her dress. But you've decided, no, even though these are hundreds and hundreds of dollars I can't afford, I won't spend $40 on one either that looks extremely respectable and is of manufactured Kenner quality. Because it is $40, I will go and spend garbage money on a garbage product.
How hard are you trying?
Hasbro knows because they pulled everybody's pre-orders. They canceled everybody's pre-orders for these on Pulse and then immediately re-uploaded them at an $11.99 discounted price. And then as soon as they hit retail, within a week they were also at $11.99. Because Hasbro knows they've made garbage. And the funniest part about all this is that a lot of you guys that complained about Stan Solo's figure prices, which really are reasonable for the quality he's delivering in the short volumes and the short runs he makes. They are not unreasonable prices, but keep complaining. The funny part is, I was told by some of you guys, Hasbro's, the apologists for this company, for years, that things like HasLab are the reason that Hasbro can still provide us with vehicles. Oh, they can't sell vehicles at retail. They can't sell larger price point things at retail because, ready for it? Because when they do that, all that ends up happening is nobody wants them and they go on clearance, and poor Hasbro takes a bath on that. So it's okay that we're being gouged with HasLab prices to get these larger items or to get these more expensive exclusive figures, because Hasbro has to put things in premium categories and also manufacture in lower volumes to prevent things from going on clearance, because poor Hasbro shouldn't have to suffer clearance prices. It's our fault for not buying the stuff. It's not actually low volumes. But then I was also told, you ready for this? I was told in the case of this line coming out in social media discussions that descended into arguments, that when I said $14.99 was a ridiculous price to pay for a 5 POA retro figure that looked like it was going to be low quality anyway, this was before they came out, I was told by more than a few geniuses, Hasbro apologists no less, that, oh, that's ridiculous because I'm not going to buy them at that price. I'm going to wait for them to go on clearance. You can't make this up. They will sit there and defend. They will sit there and defend Hasbro's high price gouging moves over here by saying Hasbro shouldn't have to expect their products to go on clearance. And then over here, when you point out their high prices, they go, oh, that's ridiculous because you're not going to end up paying that and I'm not going to pay that either. I'm just going to wait for it to go on clearance. I thought you just said Hasbro having to put things on clearance was bad. And now you're saying that's exactly the way you buy from them. Make up your mind. We are dealing with a product line that was knowingly discounted right at launch by Hasbro. Pre-orders were canceled. Things got re-upped onto Pulse at $11.99. Target has slashed their prices to $11.99 for these. Instantly, virtually instantly. And yet, that doesn't indicate trash. That doesn't indicate garbage. That doesn't indicate not worth it. Because this thing was already over 25% the price of what a Stan Solo one might have been. And a Stan Solo one is one you can display in your collection with your Kenner originals. Both the Marion and the Indy. It amazes me. I can't afford a $600 Marion. Understood. I can't afford a $200 Indy. Understood. I won't pay for a $40 one though. I'll go buy this $14 piece of crap. And I don't know if it's because you're obsessed with who's on the copyright stamp, or if you just don't like people who innovate, or what, but Hasbro does not have the chops to do this kind of work. They barely have the chops to do their 6-inch stuff. And I've seen the 6-inch Indy, and it is terrible. I don't know what it's going to take for you guys to start figuring out that sometimes a $40 figure is very reasonable and very worth it. I mean, you're talking about a Stan Solo figure where the spring action in the arm is still present and works in both directions. Whereas on the Hasbro Retro Collection figure, it only works in one direction. The other direction, it gets gummed up and it barely works overall. Again, a simulation rather than an actual product. But hey, you don't have to worry, because Hasbro won the day on this one. They put out their crap products that you get to pick up for a really cheap price and be probably not so proud of on a shelf.
Your appearance is exactly the way I imagined.
Stan Solo did the smart thing. Stan Solo always does the smart thing. He's not looking to go up against Hasbro's legal department. He's not trying to take them on. He's just trying to deliver the best vintage style figures to collectors, people in our age group. And this Indiana Jones would have been incredible. And I hope that you've now seen it. It will make some of you rethink that whole complaint about pricing. Because with the vintage figures being so high in price that it made them so desirable, the $14 Hasbro Indy and Marion are abject failures. They are embarrassing. But hey, $40 was too much, right? Too much. Thank goodness for the $14.99, immediately discounted to $11.99 pile of garbage. Final Faction figures are objectively better than these toys. And these aren't aimed at kids, because kids don't know who Indiana Jones is. He hasn't had a movie in 15 years, and before that he hadn't had a movie in almost 20. These are aimed at adults. And the last thing I'll say on this is to Hasbro. You guys aren't good at this. You need to be focusing your attention on shoring up your 6-inch characters and products, because those are starting to slack. You need to shore that up again. And I would argue that if you're insistent on doing something like a retro collection line for Return of the Jedi or Indiana Jones, you might want to start outsourcing that. And no, not to Super 7. You would do well to outsource it to somebody like Stan Solo. They get what Kenner was about. They get it. It would make you guys at that company look a lot better. Selling those figures at a Hasbro Pulse, maybe exclusive price, because they're a little more expensive to tool up because they're done right, but they are things that people would be proud to display. They would have the proper card backs. They would have the proper engineering, the proper plastics, the proper material. And they would still be sold at a very reasonable $30 to $40 price. With you guys behind Stan Solo and producing at a certain volume, I bet you guys could get the price down below $40. But will you have the humility to do that? I seriously doubt it. So you guys keep pumping out this garbage while your little acolytes keep buying it. And the rest of us can dream about what could have been if both the collector world and the Hasbro executives would hang up their pride and do what's best for the collector.
You don't look very happy.
Fools. Bureaucratic
What'd
fools.
they say?
You don't know what they've got there.